The reactions to Donald Trump winning are all over the place.
The far right wants us to feel powerless. Extremists are counting on apathy, cynicism, heartbreak.
They frankly start with Jimmy Kimmel literally in tears. And they go to AOC talking fascism, to Elizabeth Warren freaking out, to the Wall Street Journal editorial board suggesting that Democrats only have themselves to blame, others on the Wall Street Journal suggesting that Taylor Swift can give you some answers as to why Democrats lost, to, well, quite frankly, some suggesting that Donald Trump, whether he likes it or not, is about to inherit a recession. And then you get Cathie Wood saying this is the best moment for innovation and the future America could potentially ask for. We know that Cathie Wood was a fan of voting for Donald Trump on an economic basis, as she announced at the event that I held this summer and she spoke at. We were on stage together when she made that announcement. But less on that, let's just start going through this one by one, and then we'll end with what RFK has to say, some of his plans, and what does Cathie Wood have to say about Bitcoin and the future of crypto? Boy, there is a lot to unpack in this one. And I think the best way to unpack it is by starting with Jimmy Kimmel's reaction.
Let's be honest, it was a terrible night last night. It was a terrible night for women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go, for healthcare, for our climate, for science, for journalism, for justice, for free speech. It was a terrible night for poor people, for the middle class, for seniors who rely on Social Security, for our allies in Ukraine, for NATO, for the truth and democracy and decency. And it was a terrible night for everyone who voted against him. And guess what? It was a bad night for everyone who voted for him, too. You just don't realize it yet. Let's be...
Wow, that's a big one there from Jimmy Kimmel. Now, first, I want to start there by mentioning that AOC apparently and her organization or whomever ran 80,000 different electoral simulations. 80,000 different. And they basically thought they had this in the bag. In fact, you can see that right here. We ran 80,000 election simulations, and women are pissed off and well organized in every one of them. Elon Musk replied to this, the reality is that an enormous number of sensible, smart women voted for Donald Trump. He would not have won without them. And quite frankly, in the polling in my over 13-hour live stream, when we were looking at the exit polling and the data coming out of this election, yeah, this sweep by women, this quiet woman vote, it just didn't show up in favor of Harris over Donald Trump in the droves that people thought. When young dudes outnumber desensitized women, apparently you don't have that big of a movement motivating women. Now, on top of this, you also just heard Jimmy Kimmel talk about Zelensky and how this is bad for Ukraine. Yet what's interesting is Zelensky literally just got off the phone with Donald Trump. And Zelensky described his first call with Donald Trump on Wednesday as excellent, as proposals made by members of the U.S. president-elect's inner circle to end the war, to end Russia's war in Ukraine emerged following a stunning Republican victory on Tuesday. Zelensky wrote on X that he congratulated Trump on his historic landslide victory in a phone call on Wednesday evening, during which the two agreed to maintain close dialogue. Zelensky had earlier praised Trump and his peace through strength approach that would undoubtedly benefit the U.S. and the rest of the world. People want confidence, they want freedom, they want a normal life. For us, that means a life free from Russian aggression, with a strong America, a strong Ukraine, and strong allies, Zelensky said in a nightly address. Now, what's interesting is you also had Donald Trump receive some commentary from Vladimir Putin today. Now, I saw this come through the tape, but rather than read it from there, I'll show it to you from an article which summarizes it well. Putin congratulates Trump and says he's ready to engage in dialogue. Like, so far, this looks like a good thing. Donald Trump was commended by Putin for exhibiting bravery and strength as well after the assassination attempt against Donald Trump. These were Putin's first comments to take the opportunity to congratulate Trump on his election as president of the United States. He claimed that Russia didn't ruin relations with the U.S. and is open to reviving them, but the ball is in America's court. This is sort of a way of implying that it's Biden's fault that discussions have ended. Putin said he did not know what might come of Trump's promise to negotiate a quick end, suggesting that the president's proposals are worth evaluating, says the article at least. And then we know this has sort of gone back and forth about how Donald Trump says he's going to end the war within 24 hours. But the Russian leader, Putin, said his bravery, I think that's what they mean to write here, at the moment of an attempt on his life left an impression on me. He turned out to be a brave man, Putin said. I mean, honestly, so far, at least the initial commentary that you're getting from Putin and Zelensky doesn't make me agree with Jimmy Kimmel that this is necessarily bad. I also don't think it's necessarily useful when you have people like AOC doing the sad act, and this is her commentary.
We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. We cannot give up. We now find ourselves in a time in history that has precedent, and we find ourselves, I believe, in a time where there are, let's say, peers in history of mass movements of people that mobilize to protect one another in times of fascism and authoritarianism.
Basically, let me TLDR you here. She's just reiterating that people who voted for Donald Trump are Nazis and Hitler. See, this is the kind of stuff that helped, unfortunately for them, Democrats lose. It's not just the lawfare that we saw from now the Department of Justice, which apparently is working with Jack Smith to potentially drop a lot of the DOJ cases against Donald Trump to sort of clean this up before Donald Trump becomes president. And on top of that, you do also have the New York documents falsification case, of which Donald Trump was found guilty. The judge in that case does have a sentencing scheduled for later this month for Donald Trump. But look, Donald Trump is not going to get thrown into jail. If there's some kind of a punishment, it would likely be symbolic, like potentially a fine or time served, or maybe they'll just dismiss the case entirely or leave it to an appeal or a whatever. But at this point, the lawfare is essentially over, and the editorial board writes there are a few reasons for this. This is the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and the editorial board says that Democrats should evaluate the quote from Seinfeld, "It's not you, it's me." And they specifically break down how Democrats failed in this election. First, they talk about the failure of Bidenomics, the ignoring essentially of the benefits of private business, ultimately driving higher growth in the economy and ultimately higher incomes for individuals, while at the same time creating wealth through private markets. Instead, they focused on, quite frankly, the Inflation Reduction Act and focusing on providing essentially wage gains where they wanted them. Green new energy deals such as solar, batteries, electric vehicles, which I'm not necessarily opposed to supporting those industries. But by taking away sort of the free hand of the economy, the laissez-faire approach of the economy, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board says this robbed millions of workers of real wage gains, which ultimately haunted Democrats on Tuesday as 2/3 of voters said they were unhappy with the state of the economy. On top of that, Democrats also took their 2020 victory as an invitation to turn identity politics into woke policy. Democrats stood with transgender activists instead of parents who don't want boys to play girls' sports or elementary school teachers to pass out pronoun pins. Worth noting that in California just unwound some of the policies of essentially not prosecuting certain crimes as felonies by reinstating that certain drug crimes are indeed felonies and certain thefts are indeed felonies because, wow, maybe crime should finally be crime again. Democrats also began using the term Latinx, which sounds to too many Spanish speakers like illiterate cultural imperialism from elites. Could that be why Mr. Trump won 46% of the Hispanic vote and 55% of Latino men, according to exit polls? On top of that, you have Democrats pushing coercive mandates, such as the EPA rules for EV mandates, laying off auto workers in Michigan. There were actually a lot of people I saw in comments that were saying, hey, these EV mandates are very unprofitable for companies that people work for in America, like Ford or GM or otherwise. And even though the UAW might be pro Kamala Harris, which they were very anti-Trump from the head, Sean Fain, a lot of members were saying, no, you know what, I'm pro-Trump, and they ended up voting for Trump. And then, of course, they also reiterate the lawfare against Trump. And they also argue that Democrats decided to use taxes from plumbers and welders to forgive college loans for lawyers and grad students in grievance studies. Now, this is very interesting because it kind of goes to show that, wait a minute, the Democratic Party was always supposed to be one of the people, essentially. It used to be that people thought of Republicans as the wealthier individuals and Democrats as the ones looking to support the lower to middle class. But in this case, that turned into the exact opposite. Republicans were supported by all various different classes, that is lower class, middle class, upper class, because they felt their concerns were being heard about the economy, about woke politics, or quite frankly, about the future of war in our geopolitical outlook. This outlook that this war in Ukraine that's been going on for 2.5 years now against Russia has no hope of ending. And even though Donald Trump says, hey, I'm going to get this done within 24 hours, and there's no guarantee that he actually will, at least people have hope that there's going to be a change of strategy, that something will get done. Because, quite frankly, this is one of the strong things that Donald Trump has, which I mentioned even before the election, while he was running, that was that during Donald Trump's term, you had no new wars. You did under Bush, you did under Obama, and you did under Biden, but you did not under Trump. This is a good argument. And so as a lot of sort of this information comes together about how and why did Democrats lose, these are some of the explanations that are coming out. Now, this doesn't mean everything is all good. For example, Jeffrey Tucker, who wrote an opinion piece over in the Epoch Times. He's a libertarian, by the way. Used to work at one point for the Mises Institute. He also is a Ron Paul supporter. He mentions that we might end up already being in a recession. And quite frankly, it's very common in history for recessions being called after the fact. Consider in September of 2007, the last time we cut by 50 basis points, outside of COVID, we thought GDP was growing at a pace of 4 to 5%, and it was revised substantially down to barely over 1% by the following year. So a lot of the data we get right now could be revised down, and this could, unfortunately for Trump, they said, could end up being a headwind to his administration. Consider this. In October of 2029, the stock market crashed. Many people on Wall Street suffered, but Main Street was largely unaffected. Throughout 1931, public sentiment toggled between pessimism and denial, and many people thought it was a temporary blip that would go away. By 1932, enough people were concerned about the problem and the big issue of prohibition at the time, and then you ended up with an after-the-fact declared Great Depression. Today, it's obvious that 1929 marked the beginning, but it wasn't visible at the time. In fact, this has already happened in America as well today. Consider that in 2022, we were told that our economy was not in a recession, even though technically GDP declined by 2 quarters in a row, which is the technical definition of a recession. This author argues that the trouble was that too was an illusion. Most of the job gains then, when we thought the jobs market was strong, were really just multiple job holders and gains that were going to foreign-born workers and not natives. Overall, jobs held by native-born workers that are full-time are down relative to 4 years ago. No one in the mainstream media has admitted this. The jobs report out last week was the first glimpse of truth because it was brazenly awful, underperforming every prediction. It also chronicled major job losses in manufacturing and professional services, and those are hardcore recession signs that are likely going to worsen, especially when all of this data gets revised next year and it becomes visibly obvious that the economy is weaker than we previously anticipated. And so here's an example where you have folks saying, hey, hopefully this isn't true, but the reality is Donald Trump could end up suffering the Trump recession of 2025 or 2026 because of the data of the past few years, which people have essentially voted on with sentiment. This is what the article says as well. People took their sentiment and said, you know, you're telling me we're not in a recession, but I don't believe you. I feel like we're in a recession. I feel like things are bad. I feel like things are tough. People voted on that feeling, but that feeling isn't showing up in the data yet because sometimes the data can take years to show up. But that could be another supporting reason as to why Donald Trump won, is that people feel they are in a recession. And even if Donald Trump is eventually saddled with the actual recession, they see Donald Trump as somebody who could turn it around. Take a look, by the way, at that payrolls data from October. These were those declines here. Manufacturing and business services in the October month-over-month changes, not great. These are your productive jobs, and you even lost jobs in leisure and hospitality. Where you gained jobs were in healthcare and social assistance and government work, something that's generally deemed to be a lower productive set of workers. Not to mention, on top of this, when you look at the chart of those who are unemployed for 27 weeks or more, these workers begin to fall off the chart when it comes to unemployment continuing claims. And so like this morning when we get continuing claims numbers, they don't really show up because once you're unemployed for more than half of a year, you sort of get forgotten. You sort of disappear. But when you look at the chart, you find that this number has been steadily rising, and it only rises at the beginning of recessions or right at the end of a recession. You can see right here, end of a recession, it rises, end it rises, end it rises. Here, beginning of recession, it rises. You got some bumps over here in 63 and 64, but nowhere near the magnitude that we've seen here. Rise after the recession of 70, after 75, after 80, a little bit of sort of halfway through in 82. Then you get a rise in 91. You get a rise in 2001 as you're in the recession. You get a rise in 2007 and 2008. You can see that rise really starting to pick up in the summer there of 2008. And we've seen this pickup really start since about the summer of 2024. June of 2024, we really started seeing these numbers pick up. And it sends this signal of, could we potentially be trending towards a recession? Or maybe because we're rising, maybe we're already in it. Maybe, like the author suggests, this recession right here actually began somewhere over here at the end of 2023 or maybe even the beginning of 2024. And maybe we're just at the tail end of the recession, but the real pain of the stock market is potentially still to be determined. Or it was the pain of 2022 that's behind us. Although I will say, once I think we're in a declared recession, you'll probably see some frustration in markets, given that most markets had anticipated we would absolutely strike a soft landing. And when you go to 2000, for example, you could find that this number rose through about August of 2001, but the stock market still had another year and a half, actually more, about a year and a half of pain to go. The stock market bottomed in about March of 2003. And you could see that beginning rise over here when the recession was technically over, didn't coincide with a bottom in the stock market. Similarly, in 2009, the bottom of the stock market was right here in roughly that last fifth of that recession bar. And the beginning of that bar was more the beginning of 2008. So it's possible that the stock market pain is still ahead, but that remains to be seen. For now, stocks are at all-time highs, which is also pretty dang similar to 2007 when stocks, quite frankly, ran after the Fed cut by 50 basis points in September of 2007, and you had rallies to new all-time highs because of the belief that the Fed had stuck a soft landing. Of course, if you look at construction spending throughout the entire United States, which is really a way of contractors to make a bet with their money on the future of the economy and as to whether or not they should develop or continue building real estate, you actually find that the 1990, 2024, and 2007 cycles are all aligning with a decline in housing units under construction following the first interest rate cut 12 months before and after the first cuts here. And so we should be getting some data soon over here. But this is very different from that 1995 soft landing that we've seen, as well as the 2001 era, which was more of a financial bubble. So something, like stock valuation based. So something to keep an eye on as well over here. But these are all things that point to problems Donald Trump is potentially going to have to deal with. Some people say Donald Trump made being Republican cool again. Other people say that this was the Department of Health in 2020, and this is the Department of Health now, which is potentially the perfect place to interject what Robert F. Kennedy says about fixing the government.
I think I know how to regain that trust. You regain trust by being trustworthy. That means first we clean out the rot in Washington, D.C. and get the corporate influence out of our government agencies so that they serve the public again rather than being predatory against the public. Second, we end the regime of propaganda and censorship that has corrupted our media. That's what I plan to do with President Trump's backing when I'm in Washington. It's a huge task, but I know how to get it done because I've been suing corrupt agencies and corporations for 40 years. I know how they work, and I know how to clean them up.
Of course, while this is happening, you have Mark Cuban, who did go out of his way to actually congratulate Donald Trump and Elon Musk for their victory. But soon after that, and soon after Kevin O'Leary said the market voted here, the market decided and corrected itself of a wrong, you ended up having Mark Cuban apparently unfollowing Kevin O'Leary. So it looks like you've got a little bit of drama going on in the circles of Shark Tank. That said, let's now listen to Cathie Wood and her thoughts on Bitcoin and regulation.
How do you think the Trump regime will approach financial regulation, given that he's vowed to replace SEC Chair Gary Gensler? What does that look like?
Well, I think first, as it relates to crypto or digital asset regulation, they're going to replace Gary Gensler with someone who is much more open-minded, I would say, and will let the legislative process go to work. And, the SEC is supposed to regulate, enforce laws. They're not supposed to create laws by enforcement, which is what Gary Gensler was doing. So I think that's going to be important. I also think if you look at the public equity markets, I think the number of public companies out there right now has been cut in half in the last 15, 20 years. The regulatory nightmare of being a public company has kept leaders of companies basically saying, if I don't have to go public, I am not going public. And so I think we're going to see a lot more work in that regard to give, the average investor a shot at some of these moonshots. So I think that's going to become very important. As far as the FTC, the antitrust has gone way too far. They were denying mergers and acquisitions that really the companies were tangential to one another. They weren't even really in the same market. So we're seeing, and yet at the same time, we've seen these megatech companies grow into, massive organizations and dominating their market. So they were denying mergers and acquisitions for, think about JetBlue and Spirit Airlines.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous. That was in the same industry, but one is going bankrupt now because they wouldn't allow that M&A.
Here's the thing. I actually think Cathie Wood is 100% correct. The SEC, when it is bound by not having clear legislation, ends up making their own interpretations through lawsuits. And this makes for a very challenging opportunity to actually grow businesses, because you're worried that if you even mention crypto that you're going to get sued or audited or whatever by the SEC, so you just stay away from it. By actually having legislation that could pass, maybe under a red sweep in the United States, president and congressional leadership passing some form of crypto reform or regulation, maybe then you could actually have a true opening for investing or utilizing blockchain technology in business without fear of oppression from the SEC, especially with the potential of a Gary Gensler being replaced. So these are some of the reactions that I'm seeing out there, and I want to hear from you. What are you seeing out there? Anyway, if you like this compilation, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll get you more info, and I'm always going to do my best to bring you as much value as possible. And also get you daily value if you sign up over at meetkevin.com/alpha. You get a totally free how to start your morning email or text with an outline of things to pay attention to in the day, catalysts, trade ideas, support and resistance lines, option ideas, you name it. Thanks so much for watching, and folks, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.